We can rejoice and sing praises across the hills because the matchmaking system of Apex Legends is being completely thrown away. Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. So today we're gonna do something a little bit different. I apologize in advance for my background. I'm in a loud place and unfortunately there's nothing I can do about the noise. Also, I do have another high quality video coming up. It's in the works right now, but it's taking a little longer than I thought. So that will be coming for those of you who are subscribed for more of my high quality content. But I saw this post on the Twitter for Apex Legends today and I was really excited about it. So I read through it and I wanted to share some of the things that they talked about with you guys. I remember a long time ago when they were talking about how the servers work and why the 20 Hz servers aren't the reason why you die from behind cover. Nobody read those and I ended up sharing a lot of that information with my friends. I feel like this is probably a similar situation where they're gonna release this information, nobody's gonna read it, and I get excited about this kind of thing. I love when they do these blog posts and they go in depth about how things work. So I'm gonna go through this. I've already read through it. I know the gist of what's going on in here. I am gonna skip around a bit, so I'll link the actual blog post below. Also, again, I apologize in advance if there are noises in the background or if I stutter a little bit. I'm doing this more live than I would normally do, and I am terrible at reading. So we are going to struggle through this together. But hopefully by the end of this, you'll understand how matchmaking works and how they're changing the matchmaking. I'm doing this without a script. So again, if I rehash something multiple times, I'll try to edit those things down so that it's a smooth listening experience. But just know this is different than what I normally do. That said, let's talk about how the Apex matchmaking works. I'm gonna skip through this. Again, feel free to read through it if you want to. I'll scroll slowly here for those of you who might want to pause, but what's here is gonna be explained again later. So what is matchmaking? They talk about the three distinct concepts behind matchmaking. One is progression, the second is skill rating, and the third is matching. Again, we'll get into what those things mean as we read through here, but the first one is the progression system. This is the part that most of us are familiar with. It says the progression system is the part of matchmaking that is exposed to players. In Apex Legends, you earn a variety of rewards through our progression system just by playing the game. Players get a sense of improvement and achievement based on their time investment. A good progression system keeps more players feeling rewarded and engaged, and more players means better matchmaking. However, progression systems have an impact on in-game behavior and can change how matches play out. For example, while players may hot drop in pubs for the adrenaline, they might think twice about doing that in rank to avoid the harsh penalty of dying early. Similarly, daily and weekly challenges might encourage players to select unfamiliar legends or weapons. Progression is a central component to the game and must be considered when creating the skill rating and matching systems. Most importantly, since progression is exposed to the players, it strongly affects their perception of how fair a match is. For example, while you might expect account level to be strongly correlated to skill, that's not always the case. A low account player can be highly skilled, and like most of us here, a high level player can be a potato. So when they talk about the progression system being visible to the players, what that means is two things. One, it's the player level, and two, it's the player rank. So those are the things that when you as a player log in, you can look at the screen and you can see what your level is with relation to either pubs or ranked. Here is the distribution of skill across the level ranges. As they say, the green line shows the median, that's this line right here, and the black line shows the outliers. And it looks like they said it's dots, but it's an actual line. So that's this up here. You can see if you look closely, there's a gap here because these are skill dots, not actually hardened lines. Don't consider these outliers too much when you're looking at this data because the word outlier just means that these are the exception to the rule. There are a lot of them, but the majority of the players within these levels are in this section right here. For players with account levels below 300, that's these right here, the median skill in each group is very similar. Skill increases slightly with account levels when players' account level gets higher than 300. However, there are many outliers in each group, which goes to show that account level has little impact on skill rating, especially at the lower account levels. This is one of the reasons why I don't necessarily like it when people argue that the matchmaking is broken because they're playing playing with players that are extremely high level. If you are, for example, level 300 and you're going up against people that are level 500, that probably doesn't mean that you're going up against high skill players. A good way to put this into perspective is someone can be level 200 because they've just gotten the game a couple seasons ago, but they understand the ins and outs of the game and they've reached Pred rank or they've reached Master rank because they're good at the game. Meanwhile, someone can be level 500 and be a hard stuck platinum. So level doesn't necessarily mean anything with regards to skill, but I do want to point out, they talk about there is a difference when you jump above level 300. And I don't like when companies release these graphs without some sort of unit on the y-axis, because at that point, everything that we say is just speculation. But based on this graph, there is a significant difference between someone who is level 500 and someone who is less than level 200. If you're playing as a level 500 player and you're getting players in your squad who are less than level 200, there's a good chance that those players are going to be far less skilled than you, just based on the nature of them being new to the game. People below this level probably aren't going to understand where are the good places to land, how do you find loot, what's the best way to rotate after you've looted up, and it can create an uncomfortable situation when you as the level 500 player have to carry those new players. You just want to play the game, you just want to have a good time, and now you're kind of forced to babysit in a way, or to just leave them and die on your own, which it's not fun for you, it's not fun for them. And I do think that level should, in some instances, especially between these large gaps, be taken into consideration when doing the matching. But here's where we get into the important stuff and the more meaningful factors of the matchmaking. Skill rating is a numerical representation of a player's skill. The number is intentionally hidden from players to avoid exploitation. It is usually based on a number of factors that represent your skill and ability to play the game. For those of you coming from Overwatch, this would be equivalent to your MMR. It's a hidden number behind the scenes that gives the game an idea of how good you are at the game. To help us explain, imagine a skill rating between 1, the worst, and 10, the best. If I am a 5 and you are a 6, you are better than me by 1. But how much better is that? For this, we'll need to look at the skill rating distribution of all players. So this is where they get into how the skill distribution of Apex works. And it's fun to look at this stuff for me because I'm a nerd, but we've never actually really seen the skill distribution of Apex Legends aside from rank charts. This is really cool to see because we can tell what percentage of the player base fits in what skill bracket. And Apex, as we can see, has a pretty good bell curve, especially when you look towards the higher skilled ends. There's some weirdness here where there's a big fall off. If I was to guess, I would say this is probably like that platinum plateau where players get to platinum, they're pretty good at the game, but then there's this hill here where you really just, there's a gap. I remember when I first went from platinum to diamond, there was just like a mental shift that all of a sudden I was able to understand, when am I in a fight for too long? What's a good fight to take versus what's a bad fight to take? There's a lot of game sense, in my opinion, between what this level of play and this level of play entail. And I think that's probably why there's such a huge gap between these two levels. But for the most part, as you can see, based on the higher tier rankings or the higher levels of skill, there's a much more gradual drop off than there is here in the beginning. And they actually make reference to that here in their explanation, where they say you can see the majority of the players sit at the center of the distribution, while on the right and left, you have the highest and lowest skilled players, which are much more rare. Note that the picture distribution does have small issues we're aiming to fix. Example, low skill players aren't differentiated enough from one another. Rather than tapering off like the high end, players at the bottom get grouped together. That's interesting because Apex is a battle royale where if you're very new to the game, there's a lot of things you don't know and you learn things kind of piecemeal. Some players are going to be really good with their weapons at the beginning, but they're not going to be good at looting. Some players are going to be really good at looting, but may not have good gun skill. And so you have at the lower level huge differences in the things that people are good at that I think lead to some of these bigger gaps. But the second part of this skill rating system for matchmaking is the discrete buckets. And as soon as you see this, I think you're going to understand where many of our issues with the matchmaking come from, especially in pubs. In this approach, players are grouped into 4 big discrete groups. For example, players between 0 to 2, 2 to 4, 4 to 6, 6 to 8, and 8 to 10. Now, really quickly, pay attention to the fact that there are 5 groups of skill levels, but there are only 4 buckets. And they say 4 or 5 big discrete groups, but if the chart shows only 4, I have to believe that in the vast majority of cases, the 6, 8, 10s are all getting grouped together in this 4th bucket. So it says, in this case, you assume every player in a bucket has equivalent skill level, either by choice or because the skill rating algorithm cannot distinguish those players from one another. That's kind of why you have this really small group here for group 1. It's like the beginner players. I think this is pretty fine if you've ever started a brand new account in Apex Legends. You kind of get the feel that everybody in this bucket is just getting started in the game. They don't know what they're doing. And that's why people create Smurf accounts so that they can go down here and wipe up and get their 20 bombs. But in the next group of players, you have kind of a wide group of the player base. So this is almost 20% of the player base in this group. And this is showing you that 4% of the player base falls here. So let's say we've got 5% of the player base and this is 1%. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is that first level, that first bucket. But then you look at the next 20% of the player base. I think this to here would be 20%. This is a huge gap when you're talking about this 20% of the player base being grouped together in a single bucket. Somebody that is at this skill level versus somebody that's at this skill level probably shouldn't be placed in the same lobby. You're talking about somebody who is in most likely a bronze lobby being grouped with someone in high silver. And I know that for us who are in like the platinum, diamond, masters level, all of silver and really gold and below can seem like the bots here where people don't know what they're doing. But the truth is, if you played your way up through these lobbies, there's a huge difference between the bottom of bronze or the middle of bronze even and the top of silver. There's so much that you learn in those stages that just gives you an unfair advantage over people. So when you see somebody that's complaining that they're getting matched up against people that are way better than them, and they're talking about somebody that's level 500, I think this is where that kind of dissonance comes from. Because sure, to us, level 500 doesn't mean anything, but if you're just learning the game, going up against somebody that has knowledge that you don't have doesn't feel fair. That's why this bucket system, it can be a problem. And when you get to the top end, you're talking about 35% of the top end players are grouped together. Now, I remember when I was first getting to platinum, I was told by the game and by the charts that I was in the top 30% of players. And we now can kind of feel like platinum's one thing or another, you know, it's not that great. It's the place where everybody plateaus. But here's what you need to understand. If 35% of the player base is in this group 4, what that means is that your platinums are getting thrown in with your diamonds and masters and predator players. If you are a platinum or diamond player and you've ever fought a predator player, you know that there is a huge difference between you and them. And I know there's gonna be some ego-filled maniac that's like, oh, I'm a diamond player and I can take down any of the predators. The only reason why I'm stuck in diamond is because of my teammates. The only reason why I'm diamond is because I don't have all day to play this game. The truth is that it's really easy to hit diamond and think that you're on top of the world, but there are differences between you and the masters and the predator players. The reason why they've gotten there and you didn't. And especially if you're talking about matching with 3 stacks of these players, being put with predators and master players as a platinum or a diamond can feel incredibly unfair, and you can tell based on this chart that that probably happens quite a lot. So if you hear people saying that it happens to them every game, I know it sounds crazy, but there's a good chance that it might actually be happening to them every game. It does happen. So as they point out, you can see that pubs have a pretty relaxed matchmaking as the buckets are pretty wide. The small buckets represent low skill and new players as we try to let them learn the game's mechanics. Traditionally, Apex Legends uses the bucket approach, but that's changing. So this is where we get excited because they say that this is what they're currently doing. This is why you're experiencing frustration and we're working to fix it. So the last part of the matchmaking is the matching algorithm, and this is responsible for determining who's in your game. Using skill rating, it will group players together to form a match. Squads and matches are formed based on player ability. This algorithm must balance speed versus quality. Should we form a match quickly but with higher skill differences, or should we wait a bit longer for more closely matched opponents? Personal opinion, waiting a bit longer for closely matched opponents makes more sense to me, but I do understand that I am privileged. I typically am in the US where we have really good matching and lots of people online at a time. Currently, I am in Karachi, and that is not the case. It takes minutes just to match into a game, and the pings will be high, the players will be kind of all over the place in skill anyway. So I do understand that at a certain point, they just have to match you, and that you will run into issues where there's just not enough players online to give you a quality match. I tend to think that in especially more developed countries where you have a lot of players online, you should wait a bit longer. I don't need to get into my game in 30 seconds. You can give me a 2 to 5 minute wait time, and I think most people would probably be okay with that. Once we have selected the possible players going into a match, there remain two big questions. How do we form squads? How do we pair squads against squads? There are several methods that matching can be done, but let's explore this in the next section. And this, again, is one of the places where you're gonna see tons of issues come to light because they're telling us exactly how they've worked on their matchmaking system. And you'll see what I'm talking about as I move forward. But if you've ever heard the term Big Brother matching, this is kind of where that concept comes from. So it says, when the matchmaker is trying to form a match, it grabs 60 available players of similar skill and tries to form a match. For simplicity, let's imagine these 60 players are all solo. Given their skill rating, how could we organize these 9 players into fair teams? To be fair, the following is not exactly what happens in the actual algorithm, since we also need to consider queue times and other variables outside of skill rating. However, the following examples give you a good idea of how Apex Legends builds squads. If we have 9 players we need to sort into teams with skill ratings from 1 to 9, there are 2 reasonable ways we can make teams from this set of players. We take this approach in pubs. So this is the Big Brother matchmaking system that people talk about. When I was talking about how I didn't think that it was just some malicious system, this EOMM, this is why. Because you can reasonably understand after looking at this, the reason why the matchmaking works the way it does, but it doesn't change the fact that it can feel bad. Remember before they said, if I'm a 5 and you're a 6, you're better than me, but just by 1. Take into account that same mentality when you're looking at this square, because a level 9 player is being grouped with a level 4 and a level 3 player. That's a huge difference in skill. You're talking about what is potentially a Masters or Predator level player being matched with a level 4. So let's say that's just below the middle. We'll call that Gold 1. And then a level 3, which would be like a Silver 4. And then you have this level 8 player who is getting matched with somebody right in the middle. So we'll say like Gold 2, Gold 3, and getting matched with a level 2 player. So at this point, getting matched with effectively a Bronze player. And if you are this 9, 8, or even this level 7 player, and you get matched with people like this, sure, the lobby is more fair because the average level of every team is on par, but you as a player are gonna have a bad time because you as a level 7, 8, or 9 are gonna have a different way of wanting to play the game than these people down here. You know, if you're very good and experienced at Apex Legends, chances are you're gonna wanna drop near a hot location, you're gonna wanna grab your weapons quickly, and you're gonna wanna get into a fight. If the people you're playing with are not at that level and you're ready to go for a fight and they're still trying to loot up, they don't even know what's the good weapon and what they still need, and it takes them 5 to 10 minutes just to get ready for their first fight, you're gonna have a bad time because now you have to make the decision, do I leave my team and try to handle these 8s and 5s teaming up together by myself, or do I wait for my team and then just have a game where we have no action? And that's a difficult position to put players in. So I think that this is the reason why we have so many issues. And they talked about, well, I'll get into it later. They talk about how they're working to deal with this problem. But the big issue here is that you have these players all in the same lobby in the first place. That you're matching a level 9 into a lobby with a level 1 because the people on their squad aren't gonna have the same play style or the same goals in the match that they do. And you create dissonance within the team. And when a game is a team game, you really want to have team cohesion more than you wanna have balance, if that makes sense. In a fully competitive environment like ranked, we value having teammates of equal skill and lower burden of carry over a perfectly fair match. Note, while we are effectively stacking teams here, the set of players we are picking from is limited. We only pick from the players that made it into the match and are therefore similarly skilled. Because of the inherent randomness and chaos of a battle royale, we think this is the right trade-off. And I actually agree with this here. There is a problem right now with ranked, I think probably because not as many people are playing ranked right now, where once you hit platinum, you're kind of getting into lobbies with gold and silver and cred and master players, it really doesn't make sense. We've seen complaints from masters players, we've seen complaints from gold and platinum players. So this is not some myth. It is happening. There's something broken with the ranked matchmaking system. But I think most of us can agree before season 14, ranked matchmaking felt mostly fine. You'll always have people that will complain that their teammates are bad and that's why they can't rank up. But if you are consistently good at the game, you will climb. There are things that we do as players that we don't recognize are holding us back. A good example, when I first made it from platinum to diamond, the way I did that was I started playing more for myself. I recognized that if my teammates are gonna make clearly bad decisions, then I should keep myself alive, because keeping our points is more important than making my teammates feel good. And so I started to play more selfishly. I worked on my gun skill and practiced in the firing range to make sure that I could consistently hit my shots. There were just things that I wasn't doing that made me a better player, and that's how I reached diamond. So if you're stuck in a rank, look inward. It's not your teammates' fault, because the lobbies are fairly balanced, and because of the randomness and the chaos of battle royales, you are gonna have matches where your teammates just throw, but the vast majority of the time there was something that you could have done better. Anyway, off my soapbox. So in ranked, you can see that they typically will match players with players of similar rank and with players of similar skill. And that makes it so that you and your team will usually feel like you have more chemistry than you will when you play in pubs. And that's just because you are in a more balanced environment where your teammates are probably on your level, or at least they're closer to your level than the randoms you're gonna get in a pubs match. Moving on, it says, this covers the simple case, but things are not this easy in the real world, as not everyone plays solo. When a pre-made squad joins into the matchmaker, we need to figure out where to place this pre-made squad and determine their effective rating. Imagine if we have a pre-made trio with skill ratings 2, 6, and 7. There are at least 4 ways we could calculate a squad's effective skill. These are pretty common sense breakdowns. You can look at this team and you can look at the lowest skill player and say this team is a 2 and put them in a level 2 lobby. I think we can all agree that this is a bad idea. Then you have the method where you just take the level 7. This is, as you'll see later, what they currently use, and it makes sense because they want to prevent smurfing from giving low level players a bad time. But it's also bad because if you take this level 7 squad and you have a level 6 and a level 2, sure, the level 6 can probably hang around, but the level 2 is just going to be in for a bad time. It's kind of the same thing with the Big Brother matchmaking system, where the lower level players, they're probably not going to learn anything, because the moment they get into a fight, they're just going to get obliterated. And then the level 7 and the level 6 have to deal with the fact that now they're a man down going up against teams of level 7 players. It's understandable why they choose this method, but I don't agree with them using it, and I think that they're starting to figure out that there are other ways they can do this. Second method is just to take an average of everybody, which would be a level 5. And then the third method here is to kind of take an average, but to heavily weight this level 7 player to give like a 5.7. I think that this is probably the best way to do it, but we'll talk more about what they're planning to do later on. I'm gonna skip past that. Again, feel free to come back and read this if you're really into the details like I am, but I'm gonna keep moving on. Apex Legends matching algorithm currently uses the highest for pubs and rank. It offers the best protection against matchmaking exploits with new players and smurfs while safeguarding competitive integrity. This, however, makes it very difficult for new players to join with more skillful friends, as the match is made based on the more skilled player. We are actively making adjustments to increase the game's fairness for parties with large skill differences in pubs. When we reach the threshold to build a match, at least 60 players of similar skill, we try our best to make a match based on group size first, that being trios, then duos, and then the remaining solo players. The goal is to balance out the inherent competitive advantage of being in a pre-made squad by equalizing the group size across the match. We know that playing with people you know in a pre-made squad gives you an edge over strangers. You might know how your teammates behave, you might have chemistry, and you might have better communication. However, in reality, it is very difficult and unlikely to get 60 players of similar skill and of equal pre-made sizes into a match. So it's inevitable that we mix pre-made sizes. And this is fair. There's no way when a lobby requires 60 players to have 60 players of exactly the same skill level, especially when you're talking about a pre-made squad. So if I'm playing with my siblings and they don't play Apex Legends, they have no idea what they're doing, but I play almost every day, it's gonna be really hard to find another group of people with 2 people that never play the game and 1 person that's amazing. So it's fair in these cases for them to do more of an average. And the next part kind of goes into that. It says, to remedy this, our new matchmaking algorithm will do a much better job at compensating for the competitive advantage that pre-made duos and trios have. we've done the science to quantify this advantage, and we've been experimenting with new systems that can continuously learn and update over time. We expect this new algorithm to start rolling out worldwide in early 2023. In short, pre-made duos and trios effectively have small advantages that should be added to their team's skill rating during the matchmaking and skill measurement processes. We're gonna get into this more, but it sounds like what they're doing is taking the average of the skill of the team and then giving them sort of a multiplier based on whether or not they're pre-made. And that should help to balance out the matchmaking a little bit more. And I think that's a good idea. There are a few things to consider moving forward with matchmaking improvements in Apex Legends. First, players are constantly improving. A gold player in Season 2 has a very different skill level compared to a gold player in Season 15. Therefore, sometimes players feel like they're not progressing, but this is often not true. I want to stop here really quickly and talk about this because one of the things that we don't consider a lot of times when we play games is we're getting better, but as we're getting better, so is everyone around us. I had a comment from a guy in my last Apex video, and I'm not gonna put his name or anything up on screen because I understand where he's coming from. He said he was a previous Predator player from Season 2 and he came back into the game and he's still good, but he's constantly running into cheaters. As a console player, and he was also saying he's on console, that doesn't make sense to me because you don't often run into cheaters on a console game. I'm not saying that there are no cheaters on console, but what probably happened to this guy is he's probably really good at other shooting games. The skill ceiling of Apex Legends has just consistently climbed over time, and he came back into the game and was getting matched against people that should be low level, but because the skill floor and ceiling of Apex are so different now, he was just getting beamed by players who were better than him. A gold player in Season 15, like they say here, is way better than a gold player in Season 2. If I, bot that I am, went back to Season 0 or Season 2 with the skills that I have now as a diamond player, I would be able to get Predator no problem because there are things that we know and understand about the game now that no one even considered back then. The point is, everyone is just getting better together and constantly setting higher bars for our rank tiers. However, this also means the game gets harder and harder for new players to jump into. And this is my biggest point whenever I complain about Apex matchmaking or issues with the game. Most of my concern is that I love sharing this game with new people. And if I'm sharing the game with new people, I don't want to share it with them and for them to have a bad time. A lot of new players commented on my Apex review and were talking about how much they love this game and they're having a great time. And that's fantastic. But I think that people that are having a great time are people more like me who are willing to kind of go through the rigmarole of being bad at something for a time for the satisfaction of getting better. Because Apex is an extremely satisfying game to get good at. But you also have to consider the fact that they want to bring in new players who are just going to be casual gamers. And the current system is not good for those people. Kind of what I think they're getting at here, that how they handle new players is something they have to keep in mind when they're thinking about matchmaking improvements. Second, we have different ways to matchmake depending on the game mode you're playing. It says each mode has completely different skill rating systems and also uses matching algorithms. That needs to end with our new matchmaking system. Moving forward, all matchmaking will use the same skill rating technology, but each mode will use different tuning values based on what works best for that mode. This will allow us to more rapidly improve Apex Legends matchmaking across the board. This is also something interesting to read because it sounds like now they're going to go with more of the Overwatch method where your MMR or your skill rating behind the scenes is going to be the same, but unlike Overwatch, it sounds like they're going to be using different methods to determine how that skill rating is actually used to match you into games. I think this is a good idea because what it means is if they want to make a change to how matchmaking works, they can tweak it, and then if they want a mode to be more casual, they can just adjust the tuning for that mode. All right, so finally, we've built the new skill measurement algorithm for accuracy. Our former matchmaking system categorized players into 4 discrete, including 1 for new players, skill buckets. The new system is more granular and has many more buckets. This allows our matching algorithm to make better decisions when placing players into matches. So we will be retiring our current system in favor of this new one. And this is, I think, great news to everyone. We can rejoice and sing praises across the hills because the matchmaking system of Apex Legends is being completely thrown away. This new system measures skill and creates matches based on 2 goals. 1, we need the player's measured skill to be meaningful. That is, it must be predictive of their performance. In Apex Legends, this means player skills need to predict that on average, squads with higher skill will consistently defeat lower skill squads in fights and place better. This is important to note because if a person is more skilled than you, they will win the fight. But the problem is that right now, the matchmaking system doesn't really seem to take that into account. What they're saying here is that that's not good enough. It needs to be a better system that can predict whether the teams will actually be be able to win. To this end, they've been running tests, and here is a note on their current progress. In our tests across multiple queues, the new skill measurement system achieves this goal. Below is a plot showing the win rate for a squad as the squad's skill rating over its opponent increases. I think I'm gonna stop here and point this out. A lot of people feel like if the game was fair, they would win more often. The truth is, if any game is fair and you're matched up against a perfectly even opponent, you have a 50% chance of winning. That means that every fight that you get into, ideally, there's a chance you could win and a chance you could lose, and you're gonna win about half the time. In Apex Legends, if the game is perfectly balanced, you would literally only win 5% of the time because there are 20 teams aiming for the victory. Point being, the system seems to be working in that it can accurately predict whether a team is going to do well or not against the opponents that they're matched up with. And I know it seems like every system should just be able to do this by default, but the truth is that matchmaking is kind of hard. So the fact that they're able to consistently match teams and figure out who's gonna win based on how those teams were matched is a good thing, because it means the predictive algorithm is gonna be better at putting you in matches closer to this zero difference in skill level. With the new skill measurement, we need to make the tightest possible matches in a reasonable time frame. Our new matchmaker strives to achieve this by flipping the typical search around. Rather than placing players into static buckets and creating a match as soon as that bucket reaches 60 players, it will predict the distribution of incoming players and dynamically chooses the optimal trade-off between skill differences and wait time. What that means is, instead of it just being like, okay, all these guys are in bucket 1, all these guys are in bucket 2, we got 60 players, let's go. It's going to look at the likelihood of you winning fights against the players you're matched up against, and it will decide, am I more likely to find a player to balance out this matchmaking, or should I just go ahead and go into the match? And you can see down here, based on the current test of the new system, that matches are tighter and wait times remain mostly unchanged. For all of you who were saying it's impossible for them to do balanced matchmaking and still keep reasonable wait times, this new system is saying that's actually not the case. What this new data is showing is that they've been able to implement the new system in tests, and matchmaking has been largely unaffected in terms of wait time. In closing for this section, since the Eclipse's launch, these systems have gone live in certain regions and modes for testing. The old system will slowly be phased out region by region. At every step, we'll be measuring whether the system is working as expected and whether the changes are positive for players. When these systems are fully live everywhere, we can then start exploring additional corrections to player skill rating. Example, to account for whether you're playing solo, duo, or trio. We hope players will enjoy the changes, and we will continuously look at our data and player feedback as we make further tweaks and improvements. Again, this sounds great, and these changes should make things feel a little bit better. And because they're using the same skill rating system across all of their modes and also adding a tuning mechanism, they can just tweak the tuning across the different modes, and they can also, like they said, tweak it for solo, duo, trio, depending on how those factors seem to be affecting the matchmaking. So for those of you who just wanted to know what the SBMM changes are and what the truth behind SBMM is, you can tune out at this point. But I am going to go into the common questions, because this is, again, I love reading through this stuff, and I know that some of you probably will also enjoy this as well. So if you're like me and you can stick around as I go through some of these common questions. I would love to hear your thoughts on this in the comments below. Like I said, I just love talking about this stuff, and I find it fun, and I hope that you find it interesting as well. For those who are still left, let's talk about some of these common questions. Why are higher skilled players in my match? We don't purposely put you in harder matches to slow you down if you're winning a lot, nor do we intentionally put you in easier matches because you're on a losing streak. We try to put you into matches where you have a fair chance of winning, and those are matches at your current skill level. Your skill rating is dynamic and always adjusting. When you're on a win streak, your skill rating increases. This leads to you being placed with higher skill players compared to the beginning of your streak. Congratulations, you're improving. The opposite is true when you're on a loss streak. You might start to feel like games are getting easier because your skill rating is decreasing, and as a consequence, the skill of your opponents are dropping. Either way, this is the system accounting for your recent changes in skill. This process tends to be slow, so you should only feel these changes from long streaks. So when I was debunking the whole engagement optimized matchmaking, this is what I was talking about. about. A lot of people have this perception that the game is putting you in matches to make you lose a bunch so that you'll keep playing. I don't know if you guys are anything like me, but if I lose a bunch of games when I hop on, I'm like, today's not my day, and I get off. So designing a system to make people play more by making them lose is a really risky strategy because you don't know the psychology of the people that you're making the game for. What I've always believed is that Apex Legends matches you into lobbies based on your recent performance, and this here kind of confirms that. This chart kind of shows an example of what they were talking about with your skill rating on the y-axis and the amount of games played on the x-axis. So the more games you play, you're typically increasing your skill rating, because usually the more games you play, the more you get into a rhythm, the more you start to, get better. And so that's why this is likely going up. Of course, if you lose and go on a streak, you might drop. But like I said, it's not about them putting you in lobbies to make you play more. It's just the consequence of the game's skill rating putting you into lobbies based on your performance. That method has issues, and I pointed some of those issues out in my last video. And as we've seen above, they recognize that there are issues with that matchmaking, but it's not some malicious system intended to make you hate yourself. Similar to when you are on a loss streak and being placed into a less skillful match, your opponent might instead be in that situation. This is where I take issue with this matchmaking system, because sure, that opponent is tilted, they're on a losing streak, but the fact of the matter is, at a certain point, that player is going to be going up against people who are far less skilled than them. And even if they're on a losing streak, there's no way they're gonna lose that game. Sure, you maybe drop them lower in the matchmaking, but you probably shouldn't put them against people who are way less skilled than them. Do we try to give good players bad teammates? No, we do not intentionally give good players bad teammates. The easiest way for players to control the skill of your teammates is to choose them beforehand, which many high skill players do. That being said, there are 3 reasons why a high skill solo player may feel this is the situation. 1, there's always a range of skills in your match. If you are one of the stronger players in a particular match, you are indeed more likely to be paired up with players weaker than you. That's because we still have to pair you with other players to form a squad, and those players are just likely to be weaker than you. However, this skill gap should still not be large because we limit the range of skills in each match. This is where the 4 buckets become a problem, because they limit the range of skills in each match, but because they're trying to match quickly and because the buckets are so large, if they grab a player from the other bucket to fill your space because they're trying to match quickly, then somebody who is not very good at the game can inadvertently end up in your lobby, and you can end up with them on your team, not because they're intentionally trying to give you bad teammates, but because the game is trying to match quickly and it has such broad parameters for what constitutes a player's skill level. This is an issue that should be fixed as they narrowed the bandwidth for different skill groups, but we'll see. If you're at the top end of the skill distribution, no matter what players you end up being matched with, your teammates will almost always be worse than you. This is one of those things that, again, just can't be helped. If you are a Masters or Predator player, there's not many people who can hold up on your skill level. So chances are you're going to get somebody who's maybe a Platinum or a Diamond, and because you are so good at the game, that person's not terrible, but compared to your level, that person is a bot. This is why I don't really get necessarily mad at people who are 3-stacking, because I like to play with my friends and have a good time. They probably just want to play with their friends and have a good time. My only issue is when you put this 3-stack up against solo queuers, because that can be kind of an issue. Unfortunately, that's just kind of the way that the cookie crumbles. It's not just an Apex issue. This is an issue across any game with the skill-based matchmaking system. In combination, the effects above can certainly give the impression that we are intentionally doing Big Brother matchmaking. While these effects are unavoidable, we are making changes that will lessen the impact of these issues. So this is what I was saying. By them narrowing how many people fit into a skill bucket, it's possible that they can deal with this issue by grabbing people from buckets that are closer to your actual skill ranking. There will always be a range of player skill in our matches, but our newest matchmaking system is aimed at decreasing the range of skills in every match without significantly changing the matchmaking times, except maybe a bit at the high end. So scrolling down, we just have the effect of the test changes that they've implemented. The magenta line here is what happened after they started implementing the tests, which show that there's less of a standard deviation across squads or squad damage. You know how you get to the end of a game and you've got 2,000 damage and one of your teammates has done 50 damage, the other one's done 200. These discrepancies, darn it, these discrepancies have gone down with the new testing You may have no damage, but your teammates will have no damage either. Is matchmaking built to directly optimize retention and engagement? No, our matchmaking algorithm is only concerned with measuring skill and arranging the fairest possible matches in a reasonable time. The hope here is that this process creates the most fun matches, but there is a clear problem here. You can't actually measure fun. This is where retention comes in. Retention measures the fraction of players coming back to play the game day after day or week after week. That's why retention is important to us. Players are more likely to stick around if they're having fun. So, if we see that a particular matchmaking algorithm is increasing retention across the board, then we know that we've likely improved matchmaking for everyone. With that said, we never build an algorithm that is directly optimizing for retention, and definitely not engagement. Convincing you to play an extra hour a day when you normally do other things isn't good for us or you. And this is what I was talking about when I said EOMM doesn't really make sense, or engagement optimized matchmaking doesn't really make sense. It doesn't make sense to force people to play something that they're not enjoying. As a side note, this is why matchmaking changes take so long to materialize. It takes at least a month for us to prove that the impact was beneficial, and sometimes we end up having to go back to the drawing board. Retention is one of the few reliable ways to assess how fun the game is, and it only makes sense when considering a large cohort of players over a long period of time. So we're forced to iterate slowly. Usually, unless we see a positive change in long-term retention, we are unlikely to accept a matchmaking change worldwide, as it is an indicator that it's probably not a change that improves the game. What this is telling us is that no, they're not directly optimizing for retention and engagement, but retention is the only thing that they can use to say whether or not a change is good. So the only changes that go through are changes that will have a long-term impact on retention of players. I think this makes sense. It does still mean that they are kind of balancing around retention, but it's understandable that that's the only real metric they have that can tell them whether or not a change is successful. It also sounds like they only do it if it increases retention across all skill levels. So it means that they're not just making a change that's going to benefit one group or another. They only make changes if they seem to be having an impact on everyone, which, if we go back to the previous data about, damage within squad and its standard deviation, or, how teams are performing overall with relation to one another, it does seem like this change that they're working on is having a positive effect on everyone within the test groups. So, I think that this is a step in the right direction. I am hopeful that these matchmaking changes will increase the playability for a lot of the player base. I know that a lot of my friends have stopped playing because of the matchmaking. In my comment section, a lot of people are constantly complaining that the skill-based matchmaking is so horrendous that it's pushed them away from this game. And I completely understand where those players are coming from. So I really do hope that over the course of the next few months or so, this change to the algorithm is gonna be beneficial and will bring people that love this game but just don't play it because the matchmaking is bad, that it will bring those players back. But with that said, I just think articles like this are really cool. It clears up a lot of the misconceptions that the player base has about Apex Legends, and it kind of removes the fluff. We have all of these conversations and people have all these debates, but when the devs come out and say this is exactly how things are, this is what we're doing to change it, it brings us together as a community. It allows us to have relevant conversations, not just conversations of people speculating. Jenks and the gaming merchant coming out and saying matchmaking is changing, but we have nothing to validate whether that's true or not. It's nice to have hardcore evidence from the developer and data that shows what they're actually doing to the game. So like I said, I really think things like this are awesome. I like to read the data and to break it down and try to figure out what everything means and to give my feedback on it, and hopefully you guys enjoyed this. If you did enjoy it, let me know, because I enjoy reading this kind of thing and I can go back and talk about the servers and how those work for Apex Legends. If you would like me to do this for other games, maybe some of the blog posts and discussing my thoughts on the philosophy of balancing in Overwatch, for example, that's something that I'd be willing to do. But I really like reading into this kind of thing, and I hope that you also enjoy listening to it. If you enjoyed the video, again, leave a like. Feel free to subscribe if you're new around here, and I will see you in the next one.